Here I am on my radio show. I'm live on my radio show. At the end of the call, I'm doing a new section on my radio show. That's why I'm recording a video for you guys on YouTube that haven't listened to my radio program. Go to blogtalkradio.com/Major Tim to ground control to listen into Major Tim to ground control, which is the most amazing comedy healing show you'll ever see in this matrix field or on the planet Earth or in anywhere else in the galaxy. Okay, so what I was doing on the show is I was teaching a new form of muscle testing I want for one. So just first flip someone off, but don't, that's bad, don't do it. Go like that, and then make the figure B with your finger there. And then you're not going to put any pressure whatsoever. You're just going to say, my name's Tim, my name's Tim, my name's Tim, my name's Bob. And it should just fall because your finger's tired. It's tired of holding up like that. So once you get to a no answer, your body's going to let go and say, my name's Tim, my name's Tim, my name's Bob. It just falls. So that means you know it's no. That's my muscle testing. I'm going to call it the flipping off with one. Like if you had this finger broken, you couldn't do the double flip off. You're doing a one flip off, and you're just holding that on top of it. Okay, that's my new way. Oh, I also want to share what I did before on a call. I realized it's like rolling a booger in your finger. So if you're rolling a booger in your finger like that, and you say, my name is Tim, my name is Tim, my name is Tim, my name is Bob, somehow it'll slip up like it just did. It kind of stopped there. So I call that the booger rolling technique. That's also a good one. I learned that from my daughter because she likes to roll boogers. No, I used to like rolling boogers. I still like to roll boogers. But anyway, I'm on the radio show, so I can't be talking like that. Okay, what we're going to do today is the first and only time you've ever had on the show a reading of this book that I wanted to read a long time ago. It says The Great Dialogues of Plato, but don't let the title think that's what it's about, because Plato was just the stenographer. He just took notes for his teacher, Socrates. So it should be called The Great Dialogues of Socrates. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first Bedtime Stories with Tim Janakos. This might be a new thing on my Wednesday call. So call in 9 p.m. Wednesday, New York time, which is 6 p.m. in California time Wednesday, hump day, which is also 7 o'clock Mountain time or 8 p.m. Central time. At the end of the show, after about 45 minutes after I help many callers, we do Happy Story Time with Tim. So this is the first story. It's called The Meno, M-E-N-O. You can look it up online. There's probably many different translations. This is one guy's translation. So I like to read many different translations because you'll get a different take on what it actually is. Unless you understand the ancient Greek that Socrates spoke in, and you got an actually old manuscript that hasn't been translated into the new Greek, you won't actually know what he said. But the good thing is, what he actually said couldn't even be recorded in the ancient Greek language. It's actually what you'll hear in your head when I say this, no matter what broken language I use on planet Earth, because they're all broken. Okay, so this is between Menon, M-E-N-O-N, Socrates, and a slave of Menon, and Anatos, which is spelled A-N-Y-T-O-S. Introductory notes. This dialogue is a discussion of the nature of virtue, and particularly the question whether virtue can be taught. So people say, can you teach energy healing? And I say, I don't know. Can you teach writing music? I don't know, because I don't know how to write music. I wrote 60 songs, and I've also done lots of healing modalities. Do I know how to do it? No. I just be it. So that's what he's teaching here. It's just a matter of remembering who you are. Okay. So Menon was a wealthy young Thessalian nobleman. Like most of the people who came to Socrates, they were noblemen. He took part, probably not long afterwards, as a Thessalian general in the famous expedition of the 10,000 under Cyrus in 401 BC against the king of Persia. He was captured and was put to death by the king. Xenophon, which is Xenophon, considered him a treacherous, self-seeking character. The March Up Country, okay, that's from The March Up Country. That's a book by Rosé. Okay, so Anatos appears later as one of the three accusers at Socrates' trial. So Socrates was put to death by trial, and one of the three accusers was one of these guys too. Because everyone who spoke with Socrates was blown away by what he said, and they wanted to kill him because, like anyone who's a good healer, They're going to say things that make you push you outside of your reality to step into a reality that you never thought was possible. But that is painful for a lot of people because they're not willing to realize that the thing they call reality is actually a myth and a creation of their mind. Okay, so Menon says, can you tell me, Socrates, can virtue be taught? Or if not, does it come by practice? Or does it come neither by practice nor by teaching, but do people get it by nature or in other ways? So what he's basically saying is the same thing people say, nurture or nature, which is, can anything be taught? Or is it like, can you teach a person how to be good? Or are they just good people or bad people? Socrates is saying the answer to that question and many other questions. Can you teach a person to be a genius, or they're born a genius? Can you teach a person to be a great songwriter, or is he just born a great songwriter? And what he says in this is the same thing I would say too, that it's remembering who you truly be. So here we will go. I'm going to take a drink. Okay, so Socrates says, my dear Menon, the Thilesians have always had a good name in our nation. They were always admired as good horsemen and men with full purses, meaning they were rich. Now, it seems to me, we must add brains to the list. He's trying to say, that you're smart for asking such a good question. I didn't think the Thilesians, what he's basically saying is, he says, I didn't think all you people, I just thought you guys were rich and good at war, but now I know some of you guys are smart asses too. So he's good at turning around everyone and at the same time complimenting them with double speak, compliment and put down, which is a great way of starting a conversation with someone who's a arrogant fool who came to try to prove that Socrates was full of shit. Okay, now it seems to me, okay, your friend Aristophos is a very good example, and his townsman from Larissa, Gorgias, wherever that is the man who set it all going. As soon as he got there, all of the Aleudias, which I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm not going to try to, it's an ancient word, were at his feet. Your own bosom friend Aristophos was one. So he's saying your old lover, bosom friend, bosom buddies, lover in a good way, not a gay way. Not to mention the rest of Thessalia. I'm so bad. And that's my clock saying it's time to end the show, but I'm not going to listen to the clock. Just don't worry about the song playing in the background. That's 1 hour mark. So now it is 10 o'clock p.m. in New York. I have never been to New York. Someday I'll be in New York and I'll be there with a whole entourage. Okay, here's a custom he taught you at least. To answer generously and without fear if anyone asks you a question. Quite natural, of course, when one knows the answer. So he says, I'm going to answer your question, and I'm going to answer without any fear, just like your general taught you, because I know the answer to your question. Okay, but then he says, just what he did himself. He was a willing victim of the civilized world of Hellas. Any Hellene might ask him anything he liked, and every mortal soul got his answer. So he said he was a fool for answering all the questions he thought he knew the answers to, because he's saying, I don't know anything. And that's how he always answered any questions. I don't know anything. But what I do know is what I'm going to tell you. Okay. But here, my dear Menon, it is just the opposite. There is a regular famine of brains here. He says there's a regular famine of brains. We're starving for intelligence here because we're all brainless. And your part of the world seems to hold a monopoly in that article. So he says you guys are all brain dead. I love it. Socrates was the greatest comic that ever lived. I was the second greatest because I was one of Socrates' disciples, but I won't tell you who that was. At least if you do ask anyone here a question like that, all you will get is a laugh and, quote, my good man, you must think I am inspired. Virtue, can it be taught? Or how does it come? Do I know that? So far from knowing whether it can be taught or can't be taught, I don't know even the least little thing about virtue. I don't even know what virtue is, he says. So he says, that's what you're going to get if you ask anyone where I come from, because everyone doesn't know the shit about anything. So he basically talked to the greatest so-called greatest thinkers of all parts of the Mediterranean world, and he showed them that they're all full of shit, basically by asking them questions and getting them stumped about with questions, which I'm going to show you how it's done. Okay, the reason he did that is because he was the first access consciousness facilitator. So you thought the founder of access consciousness, Dr. Dane here, actually he's the co-creator. The founder of access consciousness, Gary Douglas, was the founder of access consciousness. No, it was Socrates. Okay, so just go read Socrates and you'll see that asking questions is all he did. And that's all that Dane or Gary does. So if I say I'm pre-certified, decertified, quasi-certified access consciousness facilitator, you'll know why I'm saying that, because I went to the real school of access consciousness facilitators, which was way back in the 4th century BCE. Okay, anyways, on with the dialogue. I am in the same fix myself, Menon. I am as poor of the article as the rest of us, and I have to blame myself that I don't know the least little thing about virtue. And when I don't know what a thing is, how can I know its quality? Take Menon, for example. If someone doesn't know in the least who Menon is, how can he know whether Menon is handsome or rich, or even a gentleman, or perhaps just the opposite? Do you think he can? So what he's saying is to Menon is, you don't even know yourself. You think you're rich, you think you're handsome, you think you're such a fucking smartass, clever know-it-all, and you're here to try to prove me wrong by asking me questions you think you're going to stump me with, and I'm going to show you that you don't know anything because you're full of shit yourself. So that's where this bullshit came up, and the batshit came up, because he was showing everyone was batshit crazy because they were all being bought and sold into the reality that they were being bought and sold in, which was a cult. And all cultures are cults. That's why they're called cults. C-U-L-T-ture. Culture is a cult. Every time you buy into the reality, you're becoming part of the cult, of the culture. So Menon says, not I, but look here, Socrates, don't you really know what virtue is? Are we to give that report to you in Larissa? So he says, so do you want me to go back to where I came from, I was sent by many intelligent people in my hometown to come talk to you because you're supposed to know everything, and you're telling me you don't even know what virtue is? But he said that about everything. No matter what you asked him, he said, I don't know anything about that. Now, what are we going to do? We don't know anything about whether you're handsome or whether you're smart. And even if I don't know you, I can figure out whether you're handsome or smart and rich by not even knowing you, because we have access to knowledge, because it's our inherent birthright as infinite beings to know everything there is to know, because everything that's ever been known, we can know too. He's going to basically say in these next lines. Okay. So he says, just so, my friend, and more. I never met anyone who did, so far as I know. So he says, you want me to go back to Larissa and tell them you don't know anything about virtue? He says, yeah, because I don't know anything about virtue, and I've never met anyone in this part of the world that knows anything about virtue. So he says, did you not meet Gorgias when he was here? Socrates says, oh yes, I met him. Okay, Menon says, didn't you think he knew? And Socrates says, I have rather a poor memory, Menon, so I can't say at the moment whether I did think so, but perhaps he did know, or perhaps you know what he said. Kindly remind me then what he did say. You say it yourself, if you like, for I suppose you think as he thought. So he says, I don't remember anything he said, because he didn't say anything at all, because actually everything he said was pretty much bullshit. So if you agree with what he said because you think he knows, why don't you tell me what he said, because I don't understand anything he said, because he was just talking out his ass, basically what he's saying. So Menon says, oh yes. And then Socrates says, then let us leave him out of it. Since he is not here, tell me yourself, in heaven's name, Menon, what do you say virtue is? Tell me, and don't grudge it. It will be the luckiest lie I ever told if it turns out that you know and Georgius knew, and I went and said, I never met anyone who did know. So he's basically saying, I listened to everything that guy you thought so smart knows everything about virtue. Tell me what he thought about virtue. And he didn't have anything to say anything about it because everything he said was full of shit. And if you want to tell me the same thing he said, I'm going to tell you, basically I'm going to show you that you're full of shit too. Okay? Now, why is he doing this? Is it because he's cruel and because he's mean? No, because he has infinite compassion. So every time I work with you on the show, I do the same thing. I want you to remember who you truly be, because if you remember that you're an infinite being from time without beginning, because you were actually with me and Socrates back in the day, otherwise you wouldn't be calling into my show, because you are part of the round table of King Arthur too, which was actually more than 13 people, and we are all forming together to recreate the round table that was tried to create it in the United States and other places, which wasn't created, but we'll talk about that on another call because I don't want to get too much into that. But anyway, if you're stuck on the call and you're still listening and you're listening to this YouTube video, you know who you are. So let me take a drink before I say any more, because this reality is not going to let me say everything I want to say all in one call. Okay, we're going to go on a little longer. Okay, so Menon says, that is nothing difficult, my dear Socrates. First, if you like, a man's virtue, that is easy. This is a man's virtue, to be able to manage public business, and in doing it, to help friends and hurt enemies, and to take care and keep clear of such mischief himself. Or, if you like, a woman's virtue, there's no difficulty there. She must manage the house well and keep the stores all safe and obey her husband. And a child's virtue is different for boy and girl, and an older man's, a free man's, if you like, or a slave. So he's saying the slave has different virtue, a free man has different virtue, an old man has different virtue than a young man, and a boy has different virtue than a girl, and a wife has different virtue than a husband, and a businessman has different virtue than a common man. He's basically saying all the bullshit that everyone tells you in the caste system of every country, whether it's India or Japan. Japan still has a caste system. They're still stuck in the fucking prehistoric time where they think superiors are superior and inferiors are inferior, but there's no such thing as a caste system. There's no inferior or superior. We're all equal, because I am he as you are he as you are me, and we're all together. So whoever you want to put on a pedestal, I don't care if it's Jesus Christ, if it's Gandhi, if it's Nichiren Daishonin, if it's Daisaku Ikeda, anyone you put above you and you think is above you, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself, and you know it. I won't play the song because I got busted on the last call for playing Sticks, but you know what song I'm talking about. Okay, so here we go. I'm going on. Okay, where are we at? Okay, so he's saying all these people have different virtues because they have different castes, they're in different societies, different roles in society. And as long as they follow in their caste system rule, and they follow the rules, and they don't break out of the mold that this reality is trying to hold them into, then they're virtuous, which is the exact opposite of virtue, which he's going to say here. Okay. There are a very large number of other virtues, so there is no difficulty in saying what virtue is, for according to each of our activities and ages, each of us has his virtue for doing each sort of work. And in the same way, Socrates, I think, his vice. So no matter what our job is, we all have our virtues and we all have our vices. So I'm in Japan, so I go to the Hello Work, which is the unemployment office, and I say, I can sing, I can dance, I worked in banking for 9 years, I've been in sales for 20 years, I've managed my own business in America, and they say, sorry, there's only one thing you can do in Japan, teach English, because that's the caste system in Japan. You only get one role because you're a white guy. And basically in America it's the same thing. You're Mexican, you work in the field, or you clean the hotel toilets, okay? There's only two things you can do, which is a bunch of bullshit. No matter what your race is, no matter where you're from, you can do whatever the fuck you want if you're willing to break out of the goddamn system that they're trying to fucking enslave you in, no matter what you think. You think the rich person's not enslaved and the poor person's enslaved? They're all fucking enslaved. And that's basically what I Am the Walrus was talking about. Anyway, we're not going to get into all the lyrics of I Am the Walrus now because we're talking about Socrates. Okay, so he says, Okay, Socrates says, after he gives this long bullshit speech, he says, I seem to have been lucky indeed, my dear Menon. If I have been looking for one virtue and found a whole swarm of virtues in your store. So he told me, give me what virtue is, and you just gave me a whole bunch of bullshit virtue. So I was only looking for one thing called virtue, and you gave me a whole bunch of virtue, but it's not even anything I was wanting to look for. However, let us take up the image, Menon, the swarm. If I asked you what a bee really is, bee as in bzz, bee, and you answered that there are many different kinds of bees, what would you answer me if I asked you then, do you say there are many different kinds of bees, differing from each other in being bees, more or less? Or do they differ in some other respect, for example, in size or beauty, and so forth? Tell me, how would you answer that question? And Mendon says, I should say that they are not different at all one from the other in beehood. So in being bees, in part of beehood, they're all bees, whether they're big or small, or whether they're fast flying bees or slow flying bees, whether they sting you in the ass or whether they sting you in the eyeball. They're all fucking bees, right? Okay, so Socrates says, suppose I went on to ask, tell me this, then, what do you say exactly is that in which they all are the same and not different? Could you answer anything to that? And Menon says, oh, yes. Socrates says, well then, now then for virtue. Even if there are many different kinds of them, they all have one something, the same in all, which makes them virtue. So if one is asked what is virtue, one must have this clear in his view before he can answer the question. Do you understand what I mean? Menon says, I think I understand, but I do not yet grasp your question as I could wish. So he says, okay, do you think that virtue alone is like that, Menon? I mean, one thing in a man and one in a woman and so forth? Or do you also say the same of health and size and strength? Do you think health is one thing in a man and another thing in a woman? Or is the essence of the same everything if it be health, whether it be in a man or anything else whatsoever? So he says, you told me virtue is this and that and this and that based on the person's role, based on the person's case, which isn't virtue at all. That's just a bunch of differences you're going to call virtue by not answering what the fuck virtue is. And I'm telling you, if health is in a woman and health is in a man, is it any different? No. If a bee is a big fat bumblebee or is a wasp different? No. That makes it a bee. Something that makes it not a bee. Tell me what that is and I'll tell bee is. Tell me what virtue makes it in virtue and not just in a factory worker in a soldier, in a man or a woman. There's something that has to be what virtue is that's not different. Otherwise, it's not virtue. Okay. So he says, I think health is the same thing in both man and women. So Socrates says, and what of size and strength? If a woman is strong, is it the same essence and the same strength which will make her strong? By the same strength, I mean this. The strength is not different in itself, whether it be in a man or a woman. Do you think there is any difference? So Menon says, why, no. And Socrates says, yes, virtue will differ in itself in a boy and in an old man, in a woman and in a man. Menon says, I can't help thinking, Socrates, that this is not quite like those other things. Socrates says, very well. Did you not say that a man's virtue is to manage public affairs well, and a woman's is to manage the home? Menon says, yes, it is. Yes, I did say that. Socrates says, then, is it possible to manage a state or a home or anything well without managing temperately and justly? So he's basically trying to get at what really virtue is managing temperately and justly. So temperately here means with soundness of mind. So he says in order to have virtue, we have to have soundness of mind or be mindful, which is the Buddha said mindfulness. Basically, the Buddha said everything Socrates said, which is everything Jesus said, which is everything I say, because I am he as you are me, and we are all together, as my friend John JFK said. And actually, JFK said it too, but also Martin Luther King said it too, and also in the song I Am the Walrus, the other shot guy said it too, which had long hair like me. Okay, but anyway, we're not going to go into all those stories, because they're all stories, because we're all this infinite potential beings. Okay, so he says, very well, then it is possible to... Okay, so he says it's not possible to manage... He says, is it possible to manage a house or a state, whether you're a man or a woman and you have virtue, without having mindfulness and without having justice? And he says, certainly, or necessarily, he says. So you have to have that. You have to have justice and you have to have temperance. Okay, he says, then both need the same... Then both need the same thing. If they are to be good, both women and men need justice and temperance. And Menon says, so it seems. And Socrates says, what of the boy and the old man? If they are reckless and unjust, could they ever be good? And Menon says, no, certainly not. And Socrates says, but they must be temperate and just. And Menon says, yes. Socrates says, then all men are good in the same way, for when they have the same thing, they are good. And Menon says, so it seems. So basically, from his deductive reasoning, he's proving that he's right in what he says, because he can't be disproved in everything he says. So this is where he's able to sell people the truth, whether they're willing to realize the truth or not, by deductive reasoning. Okay, Menon says, certainly not. Okay, I'm just going to go a little bit longer on this one. We're going to take it up in the next call. I just realized there's some pages ripped out of this book, because this book is so old, it's falling apart. And I got this book from a guy, I wish I remembered who it was, but he had a friend's number. I'll probably try to call this friend, because I got this like 20 years ago when I was a college student in Orange County. Actually, no, I was in San Diego going to Mesa College. And the guy was a songwriter, and I forgot his name, but his friend was named Chris, and his other friend was named John, and his other friend's name was Tammy. And I have their phone numbers here. I'm going to call them and see if they're actually still in existence, and find out who this person was that loaned him this book. Because this person was a good songwriter, and I'm sure he's a much better songwriter, because I was wanting to be a songwriter at that time, and I was studying under him to be a songwriter. So if I got incredibly much better over those many years, he must have got much better as well, if he didn't kill himself like most songwriters do. Okay, whether they choose someone to shoot them or not, that's up to them. But some people just kill themselves by creating cancer and other things. Okay, there was never a dead man who didn't want to die, which is one of the lyrics in Julian Lennon's song, which I think is a better songwriter than John Lennon even is, because he was able to step on his dad's shoulders and write better songs. So if you buy the last 5 CDs of Julian Lennon, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so Socrates says, since therefore the same virtue is in all, try to tell me and try to remember what Georgius said it is, and what you say too. Menon says, what can it be but to be able to rule men, if you want something which is the same in all? So he says, the only thing that everyone has in virtue is to rule men, which is basically what a military leader says, because he's a military leader. And Socrates is going to prove that's a bunch of fucking bullshit. Ruling men is not... So Nichiren Daishonin says, master your mind before it masters you. And that's the same thing Socrates said. He said, know thyself, and you will know everyone else, because you are everyone else. And you won't need to rule and control other people, because you have control of yourself. And everyone will do what you want them to do, because you'll be the one they're going to be looking after, because you're the only one that has self-control, because they have no self-control whatsoever. Okay, so that's what I'm here to do, is to teach you guys self-control by showing you how out of control I am. That was meant to be ironic. Okay. What can it be put... Okay, so Menon says, what can it be but to be able to rule man, if you want something which is the same in all? Socrates says, that is just what I do want. But it is the same virtue in a boy, Menon, and a slave. for each of them to be able to rule his master. And do you think he that ruled would still be a slave? Menon says, no, Socrates, I certainly don't think that. So he says, if a slave is willing to have virtue or remember who he is, he can rule his master. And he says a boy can rule their parent if he's willing to have virtue, which is self-mastery and the ability to control people by controlling yourself, which is the only thing you really need to control, because you can't control other people. But you can be totally out of control like I am and actually realize that that's more in control than anyone is who thinks they're in control. Because anyone who thinks they're in control is actually more out of control than I am, because everything you're trying to prove is what you believe you're not. So anyone who's trying to control you or control their government or control the world is someone who's completely out of control, because they wouldn't be trying to control you and control other people if they weren't so out of control. They're out of control because they have no self-control. I have complete self-control, so I can be completely out of control and still have ease, joy, and glory in everything I do. Okay, so Socrates says, a slave can control his master if he has this thing called virtue. And Menon says, no, Socrates, I certainly don't think that the slave wouldn't be able to control his master if he had virtue. So he's basically agreeing with him. It's a negative question. So, okay, Socrates says, for it isn't reasonable, my good fellow. But here is another thing to consider. You say, able to rule, in quotes. Shall we not add to it justly, not unjustly? So he says, you say the ability to rule is what is virtue. To rule men is what this warrior says virtue is. And he says, do you think it's the ability to rule justly or the ability to rule unjustly? Do you think there's a really difference? And Menon says, virtue, Menon. Or no, he says, I think so, yes. For justice is virtue, Socrates. So Socrates says, virtue, Menon, or a virtue. So he says, justice is just one virtue. That isn't virtue. And Menon says, what do you mean by that? Socrates says, the same as in anything else. For example, if you please, take roughness or roundness. Okay, a roundness. This, I would say, is a figure, not simply just figure. I would say so because there are other figures like squares and rectangles and triangles. There's other ones. So a round is a figure, but it isn't figure because figures encompass everything. So I'm going to go on from here later on because this is going to be a long dialogue and a lot of things I have to say about it. But just know that he's going to basically tear apart all the bullshit lies of his cult, otherwise known as culture, and show that they're all full of shit, and that's why they killed him. And they asked him, what do you want your death sentence to be? Because in that time, there was a justice system where you get to be judged by your peers, and your peers wasn't just people who lived in the same socioeconomic background as you. They were actually your friends and brothers. So you had one family member, one good friend, and one neighbor and one other person, and they all judged you after the trial. What was your prosecution? And you got to say to them what you wanted your punishment to be. So he says, at his trial, which I'll get into on another reading, when he was going to be killed, he said, the judge says, okay, Socrates, you've been condemned to death. It's your choice to either take death or to recommend to the jury of your peers what you think is a better sentence. He says, yes, what I recommend is, because I've been helping people break out of the reality that they're stuck in, which is basically all the lies they're stuck in, and I've been helping them realize that they're infinite beings and they're able to know their infiniteness by asking questions. I think my penalty for that is I should be sent around by the government to every other country as an ambassador of peace to teach them what I've been teaching in this country that has helped so many people free themselves from all the bullshit your government has put them through. That's what he said. And they said, sorry. Even his peers said, we're not going to pay for you to go all around the world and do what you've done to all the great thinkers of our time and show them that they're all full of shit. Because you're the only one who knows that you know that you know, because you know that you don't know nothing. So he said, basically, I don't know anything. I don't believe anything. I don't know anything, but I'm willing to learn anything if you're willing to teach me. And he would ask many questions, and in the questioning, he would bring out the most brilliant conversations in the people that thought they knew nothing about what they thought they didn't know nothing about. And he taught them that they actually know more than they're willing to know. And that's when I'm here on the call to teach you guys. So this is just their first bedtime story for the new year. 2016 is coming. It hasn't come yet. It's coming in springtime, the real new year, when Jesus was, when I was born, when I walked in. And I'm here to let you know that I and you are me all together.
And Monday morning, early, bright and early, but it's just late fall.